the assassin who started investigating his own crime. William Crawford was a professional killer who had never felt guilt about his work until he murdered Gabriel Stone. Now he was experiencing his victim's memories, feeling his victim's emotions, and hearing his victim's voice demanding justice. The psychic investigator was solving his own murder from inside his killer's mind. Welcome to Justice System USA, where we bring you the untold stories of America's legal system. Before we continue with Gabriel's incredible story of supernatural, justice, psychic abilities, and the thin line between life and death, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories of justice beyond the grave deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter, and your support helps us keep bringing them to light. The Last Investigation. October 31st, 2024, Salem, Massachusetts. Gabriel Stone had spent 15 years investigating paranormal phenomena, and Halloween night was always his busiest time of year. As a licensed private investigator who specialized in cases involving psychic abilities, supernatural claims, and unexplained deaths, Gabriel had built a reputation for finding rational explanations for seemingly impossible events. But Gabriel himself was far from rational, possessed genuine psychic abilities that he kept hidden from most of his clients and colleagues, could sense strong emotions from objects, occasionally glimpse fragments of other people's memories, and sometimes predict events that hadn't yet occurred. These abilities made him exceptionally good at his job, but they also made him a target for people who preferred their secrets to stay buried. That Halloween evening, Gabriel was investigating what appeared to be a straightforward case of insurance fraud. Elizabeth Hartwell, the wealthy widow of a pharmaceutical executive, claimed that her late husband was communicating with her from beyond the grave, warning her about corporate conspiracies and hidden bank accounts. She wanted Gabriel to document these supernatural communications to support her lawsuit against her husband's former company. Gabriel suspected that Elizabeth was either delusional or deliberately fabricating supernatural evidence to strengthen her legal case. But as he conducted his investigation, psychic abilities began picking up genuine traces of fear, guilt, and desperation that suggested something more sinister was occurring. The case had led Gabriel to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Salem, where Elizabeth's husband had supposedly hidden evidence of corporate wrongdoing before his suspicious death. 6 months earlier, Gabriel's psychic senses were screaming warnings as he approached the building, but his investigative instincts demanded that he uncover the truth. What Gabriel didn't know was that he had been walking into a trap carefully orchestrated by people who viewed his psychic abilities as a threat to their carefully constructed lies. The professional, William Crawford, had been killing people for money for 12 years, and Gabriel Stone was just another assignment. Crawford worked exclusively for a private military contracting firm that provided security solutions for corporations dealing with problematic individuals. His targets were usually whistleblowers, investigative journalists, or activists who posed threats to his clients' business interests. Crawford was a consummate professional who took pride in his work. He was methodical, emotionless, and efficient. His kills looked like accidents, suicides, or random crimes, and he had never been suspected of any wrongdoing. He viewed murder as a technical skill rather than a moral choice, and he had never experienced guilt, regret, or empathy for his victims. The contract on Gabriel Stone had come from Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, the company that Elizabeth Hartwell was suing. Gabriel's investigation was getting too close to evidence that could expose a conspiracy involving illegal drug trials, falsified safety data, and the murder of executives who had threatened to expose the truth. Gabriel's psychic abilities made him particularly dangerous, because he could potentially uncover information that was hidden even from traditional investigative methods. Crawford had spent 2 weeks studying Gabriel's routines, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. He knew that the psychic investigator was divorced, lived alone, and often worked dangerous cases in isolated locations. The abandoned warehouse was the perfect place to stage what would appear to be a random mugging gone wrong. Crawford positioned himself in the warehouse before Gabriel arrived. Using night vision equipment to track his target's movements through the building, he waited until Gabriel was alone and vulnerable before making his move. The murder. Gabriel entered the warehouse through a side entrance using a flashlight to navigate the cluttered interior. His psychic abilities were detecting strong emotional imprints throughout the building. Fear, pain, and desperation that suggested violent events had occurred here recently. As Gabriel moved deeper into the warehouse, began experiencing flashes, a vision that showed him fragments of what had happened in this place. He saw Elizabeth Hartwell's husband, David Hartwell, meeting with corporate executives who were threatening him. He saw the fear in David's eyes as he realized that his former colleagues intended to kill him rather than allow him to expose their crimes. But Gabriel's psychic focus was so intense that he missed the physical danger approaching from behind. William Crawford moved through the warehouse with the silent precision of a trained killer. Closing the distance between himself and his target without making a sound, the attack came suddenly and brutally. Crawford struck Gabriel in the head with a steel pipe, intending to render him unconscious before staging the scene to look like a robbery. But Gabriel's psychic abilities, heightened by the life-threatening situation, created an unexpected connection between the two men as Gabriel fell to the warehouse floor. Blood streaming from his head wound, his mind instinctively reached out for help. His psychic abilities, operating on pure survival instinct, latched onto the closest human consciousness, William Crawford's mind. For a split second, the barrier between the two men's thoughts dissolved completely. Gabriel experienced Crawford's cold satisfaction at landing a successful blow. Crawford felt Gabriel's terror and confusion as consciousness slipped away. Neither man understood what was happening, but both sensed that something fundamental had changed in the space between them. Crawford completed his assignment with his usual efficiency. He struck Gabriel several more times to ensure that the head injuries would be fatal, arranged the scene to suggest a random robbery, and left the warehouse confident that he had committed another perfect crime. But as Crawford drove away from the scene, he began experiencing strange sensations that he couldn't explain. Flashes of memories that weren't his own, emotional responses that felt foreign and disturbing. For the first time in his professional career, William Crawford felt something that might have been guilt. The haunting begins. Gabriel Stone died at 11:47 p.m. on Halloween night, but his connection to William Crawford's mind didn't end with his death. Emergency responders found Gabriel's body the next morning and initially treated his death as a homicide investigation. But without witnesses or clear evidence pointing to a specific suspect, the case quickly went cold. Detective Rachel Winters, who was assigned to investigate Gabriel's murder, found the crime scene puzzling. The staging suggested a robbery, but Gabriel's expensive psychic investigation equipment had been left untouched. His wallet was missing, but his credit cards were found scattered nearby, as if the killer had taken only cash. Most strangely, there were no signs of struggle beyond the initial attack, which suggested that Gabriel had been taken completely by surprise. Meanwhile, William Crawford was experiencing the most disturbing week of his professional life. Man who had killed dozens of people without feeling any emotional response was now being overwhelmed by sensations he couldn't understand or control. Crawford began experiencing vivid dreams that weren't his own. He saw Gabriel's childhood, his failed marriage, his first experiences with psychic phenomena. He felt Gabriel's love for his ex-wife, Elizabeth Stone, his frustration with clients who dismissed his abilities, and his dedication to helping people find truth in situations that seemed impossible. More disturbing were the waking moments when Crawford would suddenly know things that Gabriel had known. He found himself remembering conversations he had never had, recognizing places he had never been, and feeling emotional connections to people he had never met. The breaking point came 3 days after the murder, when Crawford woke up speaking in Gabriel's voice, the voice from beyond. "You can't run from what you've done," Crawford heard himself saying in a voice that wasn't his own. "I know who you are, William. I know who hired you, and I know why you killed me." Crawford had experienced strange dreams and memories since the murder, but this was the first time Gabriel's consciousness had manifested as a distinct voice in his mind. The experience was terrifying in ways that Crawford's previous victims' deaths had never been. "You're not real," Crawford said aloud, standing in his bathroom and staring at his reflection in the mirror. "Dead people don't talk. But I don't believe in ghosts." "You don't have to believe in me," Gabriel's voice replied from inside Crawford's mind. "I'm here whether you accept it or not. And I'm not leaving until you face justice for what you did." Crawford tried to convince himself that he was experiencing some kind of psychological breakdown brought on by stress or guilt. He had heard of killers who developed multiple personality disorders or suffered hallucinations after committing crimes. But Gabriel's voice carried information that Crawford couldn't have known on his own. Gabriel told Crawford about his investigation into Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, about the evidence he had uncovered regarding illegal drug trials, and about the corporate conspiracy that had led to his murder. He described details about Crawford's employer, his previous assignments, and his methods that no hallucination could have provided. Most unnervingly, Gabriel began revealing personal information about Crawford's life that even Crawford had forgotten: childhood memories, traumatic experiences, and the psychological damage that had turned him into a killer. "You weren't born evil, William," Gabriel's voice said during one of their conversations. "I can see your memories now, just like you can see mine. I know what they did to you when you were 8 years old. I know why you learned to turn off your emotions. But that doesn't excuse what you've become." The investigation from within. As days passed, Gabriel's presence in Crawford's mind became stronger and more persistent. Instead of simply haunting his killer, Gabriel began conducting his own murder investigation from inside Crawford's consciousness. Using Crawford's access to corporate databases and communication systems, Gabriel guided his unwilling host to gather evidence about the conspiracy that had led to his death. Crawford found himself compelled to research Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, to contact Gabriel's clients, and to uncover the network of corruption that connected his employer to the pharmaceutical company. Gabriel's psychic abilities, now channeled through Crawford's living brain, allowed him to access information and make connections that would have been impossible during his lifetime. He could sense the emotional states of people Crawford encountered, detect lies and deceptions, and even glimpse fragments of other people's memories through physical contact. "We're going to solve this case together," Gabriel told Crawford. "Going to help me find justice, whether you want to or not." Crawford tried to resist Gabriel's influence, but he found that fighting the psychic investigator's presence only made it stronger. When Crawford attempted to ignore Gabriel's voice, he would experience crippling headaches and disorienting memory flashes. When he tried to act against Gabriel's investigation, he would find himself physically unable to complete actions that would harm the case. The most disturbing aspect of their forced partnership was that Crawford was beginning to experience Gabriel's emotions as if they were his own. He felt genuine grief over his victim's death, anger at the injustice of the murder, and determination to expose the truth. These emotions were completely foreign to Crawford's psychological makeup, but they were becoming increasingly difficult to separate from his own thoughts. The evidence emerges. Working through Crawford, Gabriel began building a comprehensive case against the conspiracy that had led to his murder. He used Crawford's corporate connections to access financial records that showed payments from Hartwell Pharmaceuticals to Crawford's employer. He guided Crawford to secretly record conversations with his handlers that revealed the company's involvement in multiple murders. Most importantly, Gabriel led Crawford to the evidence that David Hartwell had hidden before his own death documents, and recordings that proved the pharmaceutical company had knowingly released dangerous drugs, falsified safety studies, and murdered executives who threatened to expose the truth. Detective Rachel Winters, who was still investigating Gabriel's murder, began receiving anonymous tips that led her to crucial evidence. She didn't know that the tips were coming from the murder victim himself, working through his killer's mind to solve his own case. The evidence that Gabriel and Crawford uncovered revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Hartwell Pharmaceuticals had been conducting illegal human experiments, bribing regulatory officials, and eliminating anyone who threatened to expose their crimes. Gabriel's murder was just the latest in a series of killings designed to protect the company's multi-billion-dollar drug empire. But as Gabriel's investigation progressed, Crawford's mental state continued to deteriorate. The constant presence of his victim's consciousness was breaking down the psychological barriers that had allowed him to function as a professional killer. He was experiencing empathy, guilt, and moral awareness for the first time in his adult life. The confession. The end came on November 15th, exactly 2 weeks after Gabriel's murder. Crawford had been experiencing increasingly severe psychological pressure as Gabriel's presence in his mind grew stronger. He was sleeping only a few hours each night, often waking up to find that Gabriel had been using his body to conduct research or gather evidence while he was unconscious. "It's time, William," Gabriel's voice said, as Crawford sat in his apartment, staring at the evidence they had gathered together. "You know what you have to do?" Crawford had been expecting this moment. Gabriel's investigation was complete, and the evidence was overwhelming. The only thing missing was Crawford's confession, which would tie all the pieces together and ensure that justice was served. "If I confess, they'll execute me," Crawford said aloud. "Why would I do that?" "Because you can't live with me in your head forever," Gabriel replied, "and because it's the right thing to do. You've seen my memories now. You know what it feels like to care about justice, to want to protect innocent people. Can't go back to being the person you were before." Crawford realized that Gabriel was right. The psychic investigator's memories and emotions had fundamentally changed his psychological makeup. He could no longer kill without feeling the pain of his victims. He could no longer ignore injustice without feeling compelled to act. Gabriel had transformed him from a professional killer into someone capable of moral choice. At 3 a.m. on November 15th, William Crawford walked into the Salem Police Department, covered in blood from self-inflicted wounds that he couldn't remember making, and confessed to murdering Gabriel Stone. The trial of the century Crawfords. Confession created a media sensation that extended far beyond a simple murder case. The evidence he provided exposed the Hartwell Pharmaceuticals conspiracy and led to one of the largest corporate criminal investigations in history. Pharmaceutical companies' executives were arrested, their illegal drug trials were shut down, and hundreds of victims received justice for crimes that had been hidden for years. But Crawford's trial raised unprecedented legal and philosophical questions. During his confession and subsequent interviews, he claimed that his victim's consciousness was living inside his mind, guiding his actions and providing information that he couldn't have known on his own. Crawford's defense attorney, Nathan Rivers, faced an impossible task. His client had confessed to murder and provided detailed evidence of his guilt. But Crawford's claims about being haunted by his victim raised questions about his mental competency and the supernatural aspects of the case. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Victoria Sterling, argued that Crawford was either mentally ill or deliberately fabricating supernatural claims to avoid responsibility for his crimes. They presented evidence that Crawford was a professional killer who had murdered Gabriel Stone as part of a corporate conspiracy, but the defense presented equally compelling evidence that Crawford's knowledge of Gabriel's investigation, sudden development of psychic abilities, and his dramatic personality change suggested that something genuinely supernatural was occurring. Dr. Alina Vasquez, a forensic psychiatrist who examined Crawford, testified that his psychological profile had changed completely since the murder. Before October 31st, William Crawford showed all the signs of antisocial personality disorder, she explained to the jury. He was emotionally flat, morally indifferent, and completely lacking in empathy. After the murder, he displays normal emotional responses, genuine remorse, and what appears to be psychic abilities that he never possessed before. The supernatural evidence, the most compelling evidence of Gabriel's supernatural influence, came from information that Crawford couldn't possibly have known through normal means. He provided details about Gabriel's childhood, his investigative methods, and his personal relationships that had never been documented anywhere. More dramatically, Crawford demonstrated psychic abilities during his trial that matched Gabriel's documented capabilities. He could sense the emotional states of jury members, predict their questions before they were asked, and even provide information about their personal lives that he had no way of knowing. Elizabeth Stone, Gabriel's ex-wife, testified that Crawford's behavior and mannerisms during interviews were identical to her former husband's. It's not just what he knows, she told the court. It's how he knows it. He thinks like Gabriel, speaks like Gabriel, and even laughs like Gabriel. Whatever is, happening to this man, my ex-husband, is somehow involved. The prosecution struggled to explain how Crawford could have acquired Gabriel's memories and personality traits through conventional means. They suggested that he might have studied Gabriel extensively before the murder, but they couldn't account for the intimate personal details and psychic abilities that Crawford now possessed. The verdict. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury faced an unprecedented decision. They had to determine not only whether Crawford was guilty of murder, which he had confessed to, but also whether supernatural influences had affected his actions and mental state. The jury deliberated for 5 days before returning with a verdict that attempted to balance legal reality with the extraordinary circumstances of the case. They found Crawford guilty of first-degree murder, but recommended life in prison rather than the death penalty, citing the supernatural influences and Crawford's dramatic personality change as mitigating factors. Judge Margaret Hayes sentenced Crawford to life in prison without parole, but she also ordered ongoing psychological evaluation and treatment to address the unprecedented nature of his condition. Mr. Crawford, Judge Hayes said during sentencing, "Whether your claims about supernatural influence are real or imagined, the fact remains that you took a human life. Gabriel Stone deserved justice, and this court will ensure that he receives it." The ongoing partnership. Crawford's imprisonment didn't end his connection to Gabriel Stone. In his cell at Massachusetts Correctional Institution, Crawford continued to experience Gabriel's presence and to work on investigations that the psychic investigator couldn't complete during his lifetime. Using Gabriel's abilities channeled through his own consciousness, Crawford helped solve several cold cases involving paranormal phenomena. He provided information to other investigators that led to the arrest of additional criminals and the exposure of other corporate conspiracies. Gabriel's voice in Crawford's mind became less intrusive over time, evolving from a haunting presence into something more like a collaborative partnership. They developed a unique working relationship where Crawford's access to criminal networks combined with Gabriel's psychic abilities to create an unprecedented investigative team. "I never expected to spend eternity working with my own killer," Gabriel's voice told Crawford during one of their conversations. "But I suppose justice takes many forms." Crawford, who had once been incapable of empathy or moral feeling, became an advocate for victims' rights and a resource for families seeking justice for supernatural crimes. His transformation from professional killer to paranormal investigator became a testament to the power of redemption and the persistence of justice beyond death. The ripple effects. The Gabriel Stone case had profound implications for both the legal system and the understanding of psychic phenomena. It became the first criminal case in which supernatural influence was formally considered as a mitigating factor in sentencing, setting precedents for future cases involving claimed paranormal activity. The evidence that Crawford and Gabriel uncovered led to reforms in pharmaceutical regulation, corporate oversight, and the investigation of suspicious deaths. The Hartwell Pharmaceuticals conspiracy had affected thousands of victims, and their exposure brought justice to families who had been fighting for answers for years. Perhaps most importantly, the case validated the existence of psychic abilities in ways that had never been legally recognized before. Gabriel's demonstrated influence over Crawford's mind provided compelling evidence that consciousness could survive death and continue to affect the living world, living with the dead. Today, William Crawford remains in prison, serving his life sentence while continuing to work with Gabriel Stone's consciousness on paranormal investigations. Their partnership has helped solve dozens of cases involving supernatural phenomena, providing closure for families and justice for victims whose deaths had seemed impossible to explain. Crawford has found peace with his situation in ways that surprised both him and his observers. The man who once killed without conscience now dedicates his life to helping others find truth and justice. Gabriel's influence has given him emotional depth, moral awareness, and psychic abilities that have transformed him into someone completely different from the professional killer he once was. Gabriel's presence in Crawford's mind has also evolved over time. What began as a haunting has become a true partnership between two investigators working together to solve cases that bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Their work has inspired a new field of paranormal criminal investigation, where psychic investigators work with law enforcement to solve cases involving supernatural elements. Gabriel and Crawford's success has proven that justice can transcend death, and that even the most unlikely partnerships can serve the cause of truth, the ultimate justice. The Gabriel Stone case reminds us that justice takes many forms and can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Gabriel's murder was meant to silence his investigation and protect a criminal conspiracy. Instead, his death gave him access to his killer's mind and the resources needed to expose the truth on a scale that would have been impossible during his lifetime. Crawford's transformation from killer to investigator demonstrates that redemption is possible even in the most extreme circumstances. His partnership with Gabriel's consciousness has allowed both men to find purpose and meaning neither could have achieved alone. Perhaps most importantly, their story proves that death doesn't always end the search for justice. Sometimes, the most powerful investigations are conducted by those who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain by exposing the truth. What would you do if you could communicate with a murder victim from beyond the grave? How would you handle the responsibility of channeling someone else's quest for justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what city you're watching from today. If this story moved you, subscribe to Justice System USA. We're committed to sharing stories that explore the boundaries of justice, consciousness, and the supernatural elements that sometimes influence our legal system. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these extraordinary stories to light. Until next time, remember that justice doesn't always come from the living. Sometimes the most persistent investigators are those who have already paid the ultimate price for truth. Gabriel Stone's voice may have been silenced by murder, but his consciousness found a way to ensure that justice would be served even from beyond the grave.